Hello, everybody, and welcome back to week 34 of tracking our local shifting real estate market here, Burlington, Camden, Gloucester counties of southern New Jersey, the 900,000 and below market. Now, this week we are back from Texas. Last week we were down in Austin, Texas for our annual conference called the MAGA Agent Camp. We learned state of the market economics, which we're going to provide a little bit of that for you today. Some tips and strategies for realtors to be their best version of themselves and to serve our clients better, as well as just some industry news and things that are going on, credit fraud and all sorts of stuff that we just want to be aware about. So with all that being said, I promised last week I would try and bring some of that stuff back. Now, we're going to go through our normal local stuff here, but I did have 5 simple slides that I was able to pull out of our state of the market address that Gary Keller, guy runs this company, he presented. So I'm going to bring those 5 up, and they're going to help put the context of what we've been talking about in a much larger context of the national audience and kind of the conversations going on at that level and how we compare to them, right? So let's talk about our couple data points that we like to. Our biggest one, total active listings and volume, which is really telling me how many homes are out there on the market sitting right now that are available if I'm going to be purchasing or who's my competition as a seller. We've been happy to see that it's been climbing this whole time, lightly climbing all through the middle of May, July, June, July, and then coming into August, a nice healthy climb. Our new listings, our pendings, and our closed, how many new come on the market, how many go under contract, and how many actually settle, they're within a 1% difference of each other. So all of those metrics kind of staying steady and good. Our expireds, withdrawn, and canceled listings that might not sell for one reason or another, are still pretty low, although they're a little higher than they have been maybe the past 6-7 weeks. And then our days on market, price reductions, days on market went up slightly, but not enough to be statistically significant. Let's track that as a trend. But our price reductions have come up a little bit, especially compared to where we were in June and July. Makes sense. A little bit more listings up. We kind of rode this pricing, and our pricings have stayed flat. So there's always kind of these ghost sellers that keep pricing according to a trend line that's not there. That's why it's so important to understand what these are on a weekly basis, really, because they do change that frequently. And then again, from our price point standpoint, our median list price has been really nice and healthy, and just kind of hanging out at this 334, 339 mark. It's been the exact same price for the past 3 weeks. So climbing inventory and steady prices. I'm not going to complain about either of those things. So that's really good. Now, next week, we'll get to do August averages. And I think what we're going to see here is between, kind of halfway through June, July, and August, we've actually enjoyed a really steady summer of real estate here in South Jersey. It's been predictable. It's been easy, for lack of a better term. I don't want to say easy. I think that's probably a little oversell. But it's been predictable is the best word. I'm not going to kind of keep coming up with different words and adjectives to describe it, but that's what I think it is, and that's what we like to see. Now, let's jump a little bit. I want to jump over to these couple slides. So I'm going to kind of leave my screen here. I'm going to go to this next tab. So let's just talk through these and what we see. Here's actually the last slide, but I wanted to just kind of start with it here because I think it has some sticker shock to it. 70% of homeowners have at least 50% equity in their homes. Let me read that again. 70% of homeowners in the US have at least 50% equity in their homes. Did you know that? Most people think that their mortgage is going to come out and it's going to be a large chunk of what their equity is, and they're only going to be left with pennies. 7 out of 10 of you listening to this right now, if you own a home, you probably have more than 50% equity in your home. So I just wanted to start with that, and I'll go through these, and we're not going to look, these are a little complicated slides. We're not going to go through them at the granular level. We're going to take some nice sweeping broad strokes so that you can just take the nuggets you need to go through this week and have your real estate conversations, okay? Let's take a look at this first one. So this first one is the home sales every year. How many homes sold? How many millions of homes? So you can see back here in this run-up of 02, 03, 04, there were 5.6 million homes sold in 02, 6.2 in 03, 6.8 in 04. So you can see this was what kind of caused that big Great Recession and that crash, is that there were a lot of improper real estate practices, drove up the sales of home because of beefed up prices and things like that were done artificially, not correctly, artificially. So that's what caused this, right? And so we boiled all the way back down to 08, 09, 2010, where we had very low home sales, right? 4.1, 4.3, 4.2 million. Now we take this 10-year period that we just had of nice low interest rates, of a pretty stable economy for the most part. And you can see here, we just had a nice kind of steady increase, not quite so sharp and spiked as we did in the Great Recession, but we were up. So we were definitely a little bit kind of coming up. Now we had COVID and we had rising interest rates. And that's sort of what the Fed's been trying to do, is they're saying, hey, we're noticing you're starting to really kind of come up here just a little bit. We're going to bring you back to earth a little bit. We're going to increase interest rates and things like that. And that's what's dropped us from 2021, which was 6.1 million homes, down to only 5 million last year, down to only about 4.3 projected this year. I mean, we're already through 8 months of this year, 8 months of this year. So we're getting pretty closer to this being an accurate projection. So this is the lowest that we've had in terms of sales per year, since back in 08, 09, right after the collapse. And then going back all the way into the 90s when there just physically weren't as many homes to sell and we had a lower population at that point, right? So that's a little bit different. Now let's talk about prices. Prices are the biggest one, right? We talk about this all the time in terms of, well, our prices are super high right now compared to where they've been. Well, yes, I agree with you, right? But let's again take a look at this. This green line that you see sweeping from left to right here, this is what they consider the long-term trend. This is what they love to see, about a 4% increase year over year. That is the goal. So if we see that this green line is sort of the goal, we can see that in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, we were right along that, right? This is often recognized as a period of stable economic growth through the 90s. And then again, we had a little bit of this kind of, overblown real estate issue that happened here. And we kind of came up. We were 21% above the trend, right, in 06, right? We're really at the peak. And then we had the coming back down, and that's when we saw the prices really tank. And this is what I think a lot of people are worried about. They're worried about this trough period between 2008 to 2013, 14, when you had this bottoming out of prices and people felt stuck. Well, let's walk through that and let's see if today is going to be any different. So as we come through, again, 2013, 2012, all the way through 21, 22 was that nice stable kind of growth that we saw, right? A nice fairly low interest rate, home sales were going up. And then you have these last 4 years. Look how weird these last 4 years are. So we had the beginning of COVID, 2020, right? So that was a little bit of a jump up. 2021, when you remember like the war stories about real estate, it was in 2021, right? 2021 was really where it happened. And then we peaked out at the beginning of 2022 with the prices really there. But if you look at this from a national perspective, the projection here is that our prices are really only going to be about 7% above the trend line at the moment. Okay. We're at kind of a 357 would be what the trend should be for this year, and we're at 382. So we're only a little bit above that. Now, if we see, especially we see in our local market, that our prices are sort of leveling off and staying steady, what we're effectively saying is that come next year, as this 4% line starts to come up a little bit, we're actually right where we're supposed to be. This trend that increased us, it went a little quicker than we expected. But again, we haven't really seen a lot of market conditions that would make it go down like we saw in 09, 010, 011, or 12 when all the consumer confidence was lost. We are at a really good place. Unemployment is the lowest that it's been in a really long time. So people have jobs. People have a lot of equity in their homes. The one hard part is just this interest rate thing, and I'll talk about this in a second. So in terms of prices, let's make a statement on this. Prices have actually gotten up to the point they're ever so slightly above where the trend line is, but they're not far enough off for us to feel like we need to have a massive market correction like we did in 08, right? Not looking to have a massive market correction. The quantitative easing that's going on at the Fed right now is achieving the result that they want to do to bring this number ever so slightly back down and put our prices right back in line with where our 4% trend line that we've had since 1990. Now let's talk about those mortgage rates. And let's start from the right and actually work our way backwards. You can see this graph and you're probably jumping to these high numbers over here. And when was this? Oh, okay, it was back in the 80s when interest rates were at 18%, 17, 18%, right? People were buying homes up here. So you can see that was here. You can see our period over on the right here from 2012 all the way through to 2020, right? Where we enjoyed really low interest rates. These really low interest rates, you can see now that they're an anomaly. And you can see why it's not necessarily the foregone conclusion that where we are in interest rates are going to drop back to quote unquote pre-pandemic levels. These levels are so historically low, it's kind of unreasonable when you zoom out here to just expect them to come back down to that, right? The annual mortgage rate is as a percentage is what we're seeing in the purple here. So you can see that we've been our historical average from 72 to 21 is 7.81, and we're actually below the historical average. Now, the historical average from 1990 to 21, which, kind of takes out those high peaks that we had in the 80s, it's still at 5.97. So we are ever so slightly above the historical average from just the last 30 years, but we're below the historical average from the last 50 years. So we look at these interest rates today and say, they are kind of where they're supposed to be. the interest rates today are kind of where they should be. And to sit here and say like, oh, there's some big correction coming in interest rates that we expect them to drop right back down very quickly. It's like, from what? Why? Where are we? Where does that make sense? Where does that kind of factor in here? Yeah, would I like it to happen? Of course, I'd like it to happen. I'd like to refinance my home and get into it cheaper, but that's unreasonable, right? So this is what I'm happy to see, is that actually from this context, interest rates aren't that crazy. We do expect them to come down a little bit, maybe even to the low sixes or high fives, but that's about it. And then we would expect to see that period continue, just like we saw kind of, in some of these other periods. Here's the last one, and here's affordability. And this is the last one that we're going to go over for today, and then we're going to kind of break. We see those interest rates, and we see that back in 1981, you were spending almost 50% of your total income you were spending on real estate. That's what this affordability, right? Principal and interest as a percentage of income, right? When we talk about your loan, you're paying a principal and the interest as your monthly payment. And back in the 80s, it was almost half your money. Now, back in 2006, we had another peak of when home prices went up way quicker than when wages went up, and so we were paying 32%, right, of our income. Now we've had this again. Look at this huge period under the curve. So the long-term average, the historical average, is 27% of your income every month got spent on your house. We're right there. We're sort of right where the historical average is, right? We've had some periods of low, we've had some periods of high, but the average is the average, and we're actually kind of right there. What's made people uncomfortable is the quickness from 2020 to 2023 to go from let's just use some round numbers. Basically, in the last 3 years, you've had to use 10% more of your income on housing than not. In the last 3 years, 10% of the income that you bring in every month, more has gone to housing. That's all we're talking about here. It's the quickness. It's the quickness that has gotten people a little uncomfortable. But when we start to think about this from an affordability standpoint, we're actually right on the average. From an interest rate standpoint, we're actually right by the average. From a home prices, we're actually approaching our trend line with cooling prices here, and we don't expect to see a massive drop off. From our home sales, the quantity of homes, we're actually at a low amount of home sales. We should expect this to actually increase. All these things point to the fact, and then you add this kicker on top of everything. 70% of homeowners have at least 50% equity in their homes. And let's just bring it back here for a second here. The market is not nearly as dire as the news, the media, and everything wants to be. And look, I'm not some big news conspiracist, and you can think whatever you want about certain channels, but we do know that they like to sell a headline, and they like to make sure that you feel uncomfortable, because uncomfortability requires you do some research and you search things and you go on their sites, all that. But what is true is that you're getting a mixed message. From what we're seeing here on a local level, what we're seeing from the statistical analysis that doesn't have a news pundit to sell, we're seeing that it's actually fairly normal. And yet you hear from the different news channels, real estate crash, real estate this, you know what they're doing? They're taking a look at Austin, Texas. They're taking a look at new construction builds in Florida. They're taking a look at some over being built stuff in the Midwest. And they're saying, look, these prices have come down 30 to 40 and 50%. It's like, yeah, because they were artificially high as being a ghost price, from before. That's not really the market that we're tracking, but it makes a good headline. What are they going to report here in South Jersey? Well, it's been a really stable, steady market. Everything's actually been really reasonable. Interest rates aren't incredibly high. Home sales are actually at a little bit lower than where they should be, and the frenzy is not quite there. That's a terrible news story. No wonder you're not hearing that. That's why we're doing it. That's why we're doing it, because they're not doing it, right? So we talk about this all the time. Reach out to me if you have any questions about this stuff. But I want to leave you with, this is a great time for both buyers and sellers. It's not something you need to be overly worried about, even if you're going to sell in 5 years. You don't have to be thinking in that terms of, oh, I'm going to overpay so much and I'm going to be $100,000 underwater in equity in just, 90 days or in a year or 2 years. Again, from just everything we've been tracking, everything that we've been talking about, everything that we've been hearing, that's just not the case. It is a climbing, healthy, and steady market at the moment. Have a great day, everybody. I was really happy to be able to do this one with you. And again, looking forward to the next couple of weeks. We're going to bring some more realtors and some other industry professionals onto these calls to share a little bit of their story and just a little bit more perspective. But have a great day. We'll see you next week for week 35.